let me welcome Daniel Ojukwu.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good to see you live in the flesh.
Good to see you in the flesh.
Likewise.
Likewise. Let's get started. You are no stranger to issues such as this, press suppression, freedom of expression, and even this type of accusation. But let's start with Blessed as well. First, what does his continued detention signal to journalists that are working in high-risk regions across Africa, especially those reporting on government affairs?
In Blessed's case, the biggest problem here I see is with the courts, because all over Africa we are faced with courts that are no longer independent. We see it in Ethiopia, we see it in Mozambique, we see it in Burkina Faso, in several countries in Africa. And Nigeria is also no stranger to issues like this. We're supposed to be shining a light, leading Africa, but we're also guilty of abusing cybercrime laws, creating laws that abuse the rights of journalists. Blessed's case is peculiar because his media wasn't served a lawsuit or anything. They went after the journalist. He did a broadcast for Hope and Heart and Soul Television, where he interviewed a politician, a former soldier, who is also part of the president's party. And this person criticized the president and said he was disappointed, he was sad that he helped the president come into power, because according to him, that's Blessed Gazer, the person who made these comments. The president has become corrupt. The president has taken the government to be his personal property for his family, his wife and children. And all his condemnation for the president were his own opinion. But all Blessed Mhlanga did was broadcast this through the TV station he works for. So where's the place for freedom of speech? Because if a person can go on TV and say his own opinion, and the government says, you who aired it, you who did the interview, you who attended the press conference, because there were two. There was one in November 2024, that was the interview, and then January 2025, there was a press conference, and the government is saying you shouldn't be airing the opinion of our fellow party member.
So that's one for freedom of speech. That's one against freedom of speech on the part of the other Blessed who was being interviewed. And then there's another thing for when it comes to freedom of the press. So there are two issues here that we're looking at. Am I correct?
Yes, yes, two issues.
So since I practice journalism in Africa, how worried should I be? And I'm saying this looking at the greater context of Africa now, including countries like Nigeria or Ghana, all the rest. And you mentioned something about cybercrime, which is, if you look back through the week, it was a point to note, as there were protests across Nigeria that had to do with aggrieved Nigerians talking about the Cybercrime Act being used against Nigerians. So I'm asking for my self-preservation now. How scared should I be? And Judith as well. How scared should we be as journalists operating in Africa?
Naturally, everyone should be worried. Nobody signs up for journalism thinking at the back of their minds that I'm going to die one day, I'm going to get arrested one day. It shouldn't be.
Except our producer Matthew, he's been arrested a couple of times. But you see, it happens.
Yes, it does. It's like when you sign up for journalism, you're pretty much signing up as a soldier or a policeman. It's like you're going to war. It shouldn't be. If you practice in some saner countries, some saner societies where things are calmer, you'd understand what it means to do your job without fear or favor. But in Africa, we can't wish away our problems. The governments try to do these things. They say, don't talk about it. There was a time in Nigeria where the government said media houses should tone down their reporting of conflict. Nigeria is at war with itself. We have intertribal conflicts. We have terrorism. We have religious extremities. These things are our realities. We can't wish them away. We have corruption. We're a corrupt nation at every level. In the private sector, in the public sector, at every level of government, there is corruption. So if we stop reporting these things, they're not going to go away. The government isn't doing enough about it. So all around Africa, governments just don't want the people to complain. In Zimbabwe's case, they've been ruled by the ZANU party, ZANU-PF party, since 1980. Robert Mugabe headed the country for a long time, and he didn't want to let go of power. Now, people fought for independence, people fought for change. The new guy who is in power now, Mnangagwa, is trying to sue for a third term. He wants a third term. The last election was deemed controversial. Several activists, several groups condemned the process and said the CCC party should have won. there were a lot of riots, there were a lot of people complaining. So many people were saying, no, these things were fraudulent. Now, all of that has passed. It's 2025, 2 years have gone by. People want to have their say. That's what democracy is all about. Majority have their way, minority have their say. But in the case of Zimbabwe, the majority wants to have their way and prevents everybody from having their say. Now, detaining this journalist has then meant that there's more public outcry because the government is accusing him of inciting the public to violence. But what the government is doing is more insightful. I mean, he has spent over 40 days, about 48 days thereabouts.
Do you think that the courts are also culpable in this? Is there a complicity between the court and the presidency or the federal government there? Because there's supposed to be an autonomy in some sense when it comes to the judiciary, but there seems to be some intersection or relationship. Let's talk about the legal basis of this continued detention and also denial of bail and also the charges levied against him. Is there complicity from the court?
Yes. I started by saying that the courts are supposed to be independent, but they're not. Now, the reason you deny someone bail is if you consider them a threat to society. If a person has committed a felony, you say, oh yes, we're denying you bail, or he's accused of committing a felony. You're considered innocent until proven guilty, but because of the gravity of this crime, we can't grant you bail, or because we consider you a flight risk. This is a recognized journalist. Everyone knows him. I mean, he can be identified. There's no harm in granting him bail. You have a video publication, you have videos on YouTube which the government is using to accuse him. So if you're denying him bail, on what grounds? So every court seems to have been compromised. And it's unfortunate because several governments know how to get into the court system. You just build a few houses for judges, give cars to judges, and it blurs the line.
That doesn't sound like Zimbabwe. That sounds like another country.
Do they
all across
have green
Africa.
and white in it?
Yeah.
I think I know the country.
Sorry to cut you there.
Please go in.
However, in the case of Zimbabwe, Mhlanga here in the phrase, ZANU-PF, let's put history, Mugabe's rule, and the fact that the president currently is going for a third term.
Yes.
How do you see this ending? Where do you see this going? Is this steeped in tradition and this is how perhaps maybe it's going to go on? Or do you think there might be even international concerns that might come into play and help the situation? The word is out there. We are the press and we're concerned as well, and we're speaking up for Blessed as we are here. This is our bit. But where do you see this going? How do you see this proceeding?
Okay, Zimbabwe is a sovereign country, so international interference can't do much. The foreign governments would probably sanction if it gets to that level.
Well, what about international communities, or rather international diplomatic communities that they're in? For example, as the SADC, that's the South African Development Commission, as well as the AU, can they step in to mount pressure?
Exactly.
They can mount pressure, but the pressure they can mount on Zimbabwe is to force the government to consider its citizenry. If you're issuing sanctions, trade restrictions, doing all your foreign policy to cage Zimbabwe, all you're going to do is affect the citizens. So it then depends on how much the president and the government consider the citizens. There are so many dictators who want to stay in power. So if their love for power is greater than their concern for the citizens, then they could just ignore. Zimbabwe is a very poor country. I mean, they've had currency crisis for as long as time. They've had to devalue their currency. Zimbabwe prints billions of their currency in notes. You could see 1 million Zimbabwean dollar, 10 billion. So all of that means that the country's economy is so poor. And when you have a poor economy, you have less likelihood of coordinated efforts to change the government. It took military intervention. It took a large coalition for them to fight for independence. And ZANU-PF has remained in power for roughly since 1980, 40 years, thereabout. So if they're going to change things, it's going to likely be within that party. So if anybody is mounting pressure, the big question is how much of concern does the government have for its own people to want to bow to the pressure and then change things?
I think there's a bigger thing at play here that I'd like for you to talk about, Daniel, and that is dictatorships and this hold on power. Even though all of these countries are sovereign, right, and their affairs and the internal affairs are internal and cannot be interfered by external bodies, but communities like the AU, ECOWAS, as well as SADC can, do more. Don't you think they can do more in terms of speaking to leaders and, you know, trying to sustain democracy and the tenets of democracy, the ethos of democracy in these countries? Because from Mugabe to Mnangagwa and now going for a third term, repression, detaining journalists, what gives?
Okay, those confederations are usually very good on paper. In reality, many of them falter. We've seen it with the UN, we've seen it with NATO. NATO was unable to prevent the situation in Ukraine. They watched it crumble. Even though they courted Ukraine and said, come join us, we would guarantee you this. UN has overlooked a lot of things. I mean, UN has tried to vote on the Russian war. They've tried to vote on Israel.
It's a grim picture you're painting, so the cavalry is not coming.
It doesn't work. I mean, one party could just veto it and it all dies. And they say, you are trying to vote against Russia, and Russia is saying we veto, and everything goes down. I mean, US would just raise their hands and say, we're not doing anything against Israel, we veto. Everything just dies down. So AU, I can't remember how much success AU has recorded. ECOWAS has no business in Zimbabwe because it's West Africa. So most of these confederations are not as strong as the countries that are part of them. The countries have to contribute to these things, but no country is willing to invest that much time and effort. And how many countries are even interested in upholding democracy that much?
Let's go there now. So good. Thank you for coming. You're welcome. I'm opening the door for you to step in. Let's talk about the greater implication here when we look at the entire continent and the recurrence of these kinds of instances. Let's talk Nigeria. Let's talk, what other countries do we have?
Oh.
We've seen other West African countries go from these kinds of instances into full-on dictatorship, military rule, you know, and all of that. The hold one party has on most of the apparatus, even the courts as well. How much threat are we in when it comes to Africa? How much threat do we see ourselves going downhill when it comes to freedom of press, freedom of speech, dictatorships, and all of that?
We're in a big mess, majorly because in this current age and time, everybody is on their phones. People are not willing to take enough action, unlike before. We've gone from having people like Jaja Vopobo, we've gone from having people like Fela Anikulapo Kuti, to having people who just want to make money and move on with their lives. We have people saying, oh, politics doesn't concern me. Meanwhile, politics affects everything you're doing. And it bothers me because what the ruling party is doing in Nigeria now, the activities they're doing with election tribunals, policies, state of emergency, everybody is watching it. And the more you cripple the system, the more it comes back to potentially bite you in future. Because if the opposition gets power tomorrow, what leg would the current administration have to stand on when they want to form an opposition? Because when you weaken the entire structures, you abuse the constitution, next time when someone else has the opportunity, they point back to precedent. Yes,
exactly.
You set that precedent. So if you say nobody can win an election tribunal ruling against the ruling party, then nobody ever will.
Is that what it seems like in Nigeria?
That's what it seems like. That's what it seems like.
So, I'm sorry, I've been doing Greek mythology today. So opposition is the Trojan horse.
It seems like in every administration, in every country, you can't run the risk of having a one-party system, else you fall into authoritarian rule. You fall into a potential
most African
monarchy.
countries there now? Are most West African countries
right, because
there now?
if we use a case where there's green and white flag going on, there's green and white in the color, there was a strong opposition that was very vocal about issues, and it came in as a Trojan horse that seemed like they were coming to fix things, you know.
And they've been given the opportunity?
And they've been given the opportunity, thank you, and
you finish yours.
Finish it. Yeah, the man, my woman can catch me. You will run fast.
We're talking about one Zimbabwe issue.
The thing is, opposition doesn't have to be perfect, but we need to run an administration where there is hope for a potential change. We need to know that if things fail, we can change. But if there's no hope for change, and a group of people can just decide within themselves that, oh, this person isn't functioning, since our party has the structure, we'll just replace this person with this person, so your votes don't matter. So whoever we bring forward is going to win the election. Let's just decide who your next president is going to be, who your next governor is going to be. That's the situation we're in. We shouldn't run that risk. Because when we keep defeating institutions like this, then people become emboldened. Before the government would wonder, oh, if we take this decision, people would act in this manner. If we do this, people are going to react in this manner. But when they see that people are no longer reacting in that manner, or there's no consequence, if you have no consequence, then you have no responsibility. They'll just do whatever they like and move on.
Daniel, I want to say thank you, but not without mentioning that this is a very weird conversation where I feel conflicted, because it doesn't seem like there's a solution anywhere in the horizon. We find ourselves, much like most African countries, in a situation where it's an Ouroboros. We just keep going around just like that. So let's continue to hope, in the case of Blessed Mhlanga, that he gets his freedom and that freedom of press is upheld in Zimbabwe. And we hope that that is not an isolated situation, that it continues on to other African countries and we can do our jobs without fear and people can speak as well. And even if they dissent, that at least can have their words out there and maybe some consideration given to them as well. That's all we pray.
That's what we pray indeed. And the oversight from the police in this case reminds me of a certain case here in the studio. But I must say, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Very insightful results.
Very calm, by the way.
Very intelligent. It's quite calm. And I stressing you last year. Oh, wow.